Greetings, friends, and this is my homily for the 6th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and we are moving very quickly. I know we had a very cold few days this past week, and again this Saturday, of course, a beautiful sunny day, so kind of leaves you realize that hope springs eternal. The hope of spring was not that far away. But in the meantime, we do our best to enjoy the time we have this winter. Winter's not all bad. We can find things to enjoy in it. And an attitude has a lot to do with it. An attitude has a lot to do with our scripture readings for today. On the first reading from the prophet Sirach. Now, Sirach was a pretty astute old man. Today we'd call him wise, a wise elder, if you will. But he kind of lays it out there for people. He says, trust God. Trust God. And that's a biggie, to trust God, because life can be so fragile, often depressing, often insurmountable problems, it seems. And so when Sirach says, trust God, he's saying a mouthful. And yet it's an attitude that certainly has got a lot of people through a lot of difficulties in their life. Then he says, you've been given the power to choose. The power to choose. And that's really a fantastic thing. We talk about free will, but it's the power to choose. And he points out here, each person choose life or death, good or evil. Life or death. So life or death has, in a sense, not literally, but figuratively. To choose life is to choose an attitude. To choose a way of seeing, a way of looking. We talk about our worldview. How do we see the reality? Some people look at reality and they see nothing but trouble, see threats, see nothing but darkness of one kind or another, and become very depressed. But on the other hand, people can choose good, and the way they look at life, the way we look at life can have a lot to do with how we feel about living. And so if we look at with an attitude, a positive attitude, that there's still things we can, maybe a lot of things we can't do, but there's a lot of things we can do. We have choices, and to activate those choices. And he says, do good, not evil. So we have a choice to make here. Free will is a beautiful thing. And we know that many animals show their free will very beautifully. Trees show their free will. Birds. Sometimes, though, it's humans that seem to have trouble choosing good and rejecting evil. Seems to be, it's more of a human equation. But then we move into the gospel. We see, first of all, that Jesus is not overly impressed with the religious leaders of his day. The religious leaders, they were very strict. And they also put out the persona of being very obedient to the law of God. Very, very obedient. And so this is where Jesus sees through the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. Now, it's not to say all the religious leaders were that way, but it was the system. Systemic evil. That's what he's really talking about. And time and again, Jesus talks about systemic evil. And even good people get caught up in this when they work inside a system. Work inside a system. And I think we see that in our own country. We see it in our own city. And maybe we see it in our own religion. That somehow even good people can be disempowered by the power of the system. People come and go, but the system remains. And at times then, the best thing you can do is scrap the system and start all over again. And so in the gospel today, Jesus said, when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that somebody's got something against you, leave your gift, go be reconciled, and then offer your gift. You know, that's pretty good advice, you know. When we have difference of opinion, when there is conflict, when there's broken relationships, there's an awful lot of that in our world today. I think there's a lot of that. People misunderstand one another. And people who are hurting will very often take offense where none was intended. So it's a very complex kind of a thing, this living of life. As I often say, it's messy. It is messy and can be very messy and can be very, very messy, depending on the life situation in which we find ourselves. But anyway, like having our attitude towards life, there's another way, and that is living with a light of gratitude and forgiveness. Being willing to forgive. You know, when Jesus was dying on the cross, he looked out and there were the soldiers standing under the cross saying, well, we've done a good day's work today. We got one down. Any more to go? Well, yeah, there's two more because there's 3 to be crucified. So we got a full day's job ahead of us, they'd say. So they're chatting away. And Jesus says, God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. I remember reading the story of Archbishop Oscar Romero. He was made the Bishop of El Salvador. And when he went to that new diocese, he saw the poverty and the suffering and the oppression of the people by the regime. And he experienced conversion. Now you might say, a bishop shouldn't need to be converted. Well, the truth of the matter is, I think everybody needs conversion. A really switching over, letting go of their false self, discovering their true self, and living out of their center. That's kind of what we mean by conversion. It's not just changing your mind or changing your overcoat. No, it's not. It's not like that at all. It's a core fundamental transformation is the key word, of course. Transformation. And so when he says about coming to worship, because the people back in his days, of course, went regularly to the temple in Jerusalem to worship or to their local synagogue. So just like Catholics used to go to Mass every Sunday. I suppose some of you still remember that. It's a long forgotten tradition, I guess. But anyhow, that's topic for another Sunday. But anyway, we're not too many of us are going to offer our gifts at the altar anymore. But maybe around our own table, at home, in the kitchen. Maybe that's going to be our altar today, is where we gather with the family for meals, or when we gather with the neighbors for a cup of coffee, or what have you. It's a time for reconciliation, which means that he says, don't offer your gifts. First, be reconciled. And I think that's really important. For example, when I preside at Mass on Sunday morning, I don't want to be in conflict with somebody who's gathering at that table with me. We need to be at one, in harmony with one another. And if I've offended somebody, I need to say, I'm sorry, forgive me. We can't go to this table in conflict. We can't go to the Mass and say, let's pretend we're all brothers and sisters and we're friends, if in fact we're not. And you may remember in the old days, at the beginning of Mass, there was the penitential service. And the purpose of that was for people to truly forgive each other before they entered into the celebration of the liturgy. That's what it was for. Eventually, of course, it just became another thing we did. no real thought to it. That maybe the person in the pew behind us or halfway across the church, we couldn't stand them, or we didn't like that person over there, or we didn't like somebody else's politics, whatever. Sure, we could go through the motions, but we never really took it seriously, let's be honest. But here he's saying, take it seriously. Take it seriously. If you have offended somebody, then be adult enough. See, this is where mature faith comes in. To be adult enough to recognize, I did something, I said something, I didn't do something, I didn't say something I might have done. I have to recognize I failed to love that person. And having recognized that and taken responsibility, then Jesus is saying, go and do reconcile. Go and admit you're sorry and ask for forgiveness. You know, I think in our world today, in our culture, admitting you're wrong, that you made a mistake, it's awful hard to do. Don't want to do that. Somehow we feel we shouldn't have to own up to anything. Well, we do, to follow Jesus. He said, so go and say, look, what I said or did or didn't do is say, I'm really sorry and ask for your forgiveness. 9 times out of 10, you'll be forgiven. And you can shake hands or embrace, and the relationship is healed. I can't tell you how many times I have been in palliative care, and a parent is dying, and the family gathers, except one son or daughter. And only in the last few hours will that son and daughter appear because of the pressure of the family. But they've been at odds, in conflict with their parent for 20, 30, 40 years. And I would say to them, don't hang on to that anger and hurt. Be reconciled to your parent who is dying. Be reconciled. Be adult enough to approach that bed and speak to your parent and tell them you're sorry. Ask for forgiveness. And allow your parent to go freely into the new life and not have to be dragging you with them or her and dragging that unforgiveness. No. Be reconciled. And how often I've seen a son or daughter, adult, approach a bed, get down on their knees, and say to the father or mother, whoever's in that bed, I let you down. I failed you. I embarrassed you. I embarrassed the family name. I disgraced the family. I have abandoned you and rejected you for years. Go to confession to your parent. You know, I did that with my young brother when he was dying. You know, we grew up naturally very close together, being my younger brother. And when he was dying, we talked about things, about our life. And finally I said to him, you know, Jerry, I want you to forgive me. And I told him what I wanted him to forgive me for. And he said, I forgive you. He did. And then he said to me, I want you to forgive me for da-da-da-da. And I forgave him. And we embraced. You see, the sacrament of reconciliation can be given by anybody. It doesn't have to be a priest. I know the priest, it's a sacramental, and that's wonderful, and that's some people choose that, but it's not, it doesn't have the depth to it. It's when you do it face to face, heart to heart. And I know that going to confession to my young brother, his absolution for me, him going to confession to me and my absolution to him, we loved each other anyway, always have. Our relationship has always been very good. But there were things we needed to clean up and clear up before he moved on to a new life. And so we did. We did. And so I would really encourage that, you know. Don't get the idea that you get off easy. I think a lot of people get off easy by going to confession, confessing their sins of being nasty or failing to love. Because it's easy to do it in the darkness of a confessional box. It's another thing to do it face to face to the person, especially if it's a family member. But remember, when you're baptized, the priest said, you are now priest, prophet, and king. You share in the priesthood of Christ. And there's nothing to stop you from saying to somebody, I forgive you. I absolve you in the name of Jesus. And to hear them say back to you, I absolve you. You need forgiveness too. Yeah. Tremendous healing, tremendous reconciliation. And I know from my own experience with my young brother, I still carry it today, that profound moment of grace where we reconciled, forgave one another, and embraced. Honest to God. Talk about experiencing the presence, the love, the healing of God. Nothing beats it. It was the most precious moment of my life. And so that's kind of my thought for today. Reconciliation and healing. Make it as personal as you can. Make it as face-to-face as you can. And the first reading says, you have the power to choose to do it, if you will. God bless.